Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Today, Father Bacik and Sheldon Borgelt discuss Jewish realism. Here's Father Bacik.
Sheldon, I'm glad that we have a chance to talk a bit about Christian Jewish matters. One of the things that happens in the world of theology is that we often talk in our own way, in our own level. We have our own jargon, and when scholars get together to talk or write their books back and articles back and forth, it often is out of touch with where ordinary people are. Now, I understand that you were raised, at least partially, in a Jewish family, and so I'm wondering if we can't talk about Christian Jewish things more in terms of your own popular experience. You're not a theologian, and you're not a rabbi, and not an official of Judaism. I recognize that, and yet there seems to be something valuable in us trying to talk about Jewish Christian matters in this level more of the man in the street, or the way it comes to you culturally, or the way you've experienced it in your own life. Somehow that seems valuable to me, and it's significant for me to try to deal with it at that level. Let me try to tell you some of the things that I think that we Christians could end up learning from the Jewish people. One of the great discoveries, it seems to me, in all of religious history was the notion of the Jews that God was experienced in history, that they were finding Him in the midst of their own experience as a people. That was a very different notion from their neighbors. Their pagan neighbors, as the Jewish world was formed, were in a much different posture religiously. Their notion was that all of the great and important things that ever occurred were done in the beginning by the gods. There was a polytheistic religions, and the gods at the beginning had done all of these important things, like learn agriculture and give fertility and things like this. And that all human beings were really doing was repeating those actions of the gods. So in their notion, as history went on, it got further and further away from the really important time, which was in those days when the gods were cavorting in the heavens and establishing all the patterns for human existence. We're getting further and further away from it. It's running downhill. Times are getting worse and worse. And the way that you get in touch with God is through liturgy, through ritualized activity, to get back in union with what those gods had done in the beginning. Now, in that kind of situation, we have the advent of the Jewish community, the Israelites, who begin to see things very differently. They think they are meeting their God, Yahweh, in history, in the events that are surrounding them, so that the great model becomes the Exodus, the business of being taken out of Egypt from the political and economic bondage of that place and be given their own land. It's in that historical event that they meet their God. Now, my sense is that the Jewish religious world has maintained this, that Jewish people have kept this sense of finding God in the ordinary, in the experiences of life. I think of something like Fiddler on the Roof, for example. The movie, I think, is so terrific when the father will talk to God just about what's going on, about his money problems, his problems with his daughters, and so on. there's a beauty about that. There's the Christian looking at the Jews from the outside think that, the Jewish family life has something wonderful to offer about it. The very notion of services being held in the homes and the religious events being there that sort of sanctifies all of the religious life. So it seems to me that that's one of the great contributions of the Jewish community to world religious understanding, is that God is met in history, that history's going someplace, that tomorrow is something new, that God may do surprising things for us tomorrow or the next day or the next year, and that what is needed, therefore, is to be on alert for this, to be open to it, to be aware of it. You're sitting there very patiently listening to me. Sheldon, did you, out of your own experience, you want to comment on any of that I'm talking about?
Well, yeah, and as you said, to be prepared for what's coming and to look forward, they look backward naturally. Mm-hmm. It is interesting to see that when the Jews seem to really reaffirm their faith in God, it is in many times
in difficult periods,
when there are difficult periods, they always seem to look back, and when they look back, they find one of the worst periods, and that was under Pharaoh in Egypt, in the time of the Inquisition in the 1500s in Spain and in Nazi Germany, and they will look back to the first real difficult time,
and
for
where
them.
Yahweh, their God, rescued them and brought them out, and
that is the time really when they look back on that. That is really, a reaffirmation of their faith.
Yes.
In that sense.
Mm-hmm. Sheldon, let me ask you about your home life. I know that I think it was your mother was Jewish, right, and your father was not. Did you have religious ceremonies in your home?
Once in a while, not regularly. In most Jewish homes, any aspect or any service, in Judaism you have 3 services daily, the morning, afternoon, and evening service. Any of the services could be conducted at home. Mm-hmm. They're really the only services that would even need to be conducted in the synagogue are those that involve reading of the Torah, the Jewish law, which in fact could be done in the home, in some homes. Mm-hmm.
So there is that notion of the ritual being set right in the home.
It is in the home. The emphasis is on the home and not in the synagogue itself. Right. The holiday that really emphasizes this is Pesach, Passover, where they really even do stress that this is a holiday and for the home that should be celebrated at home and not in the synagogue. That's what the Passover Seder is for. Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is bound to affect your consciousness. I think that there is the notion it's bound to be raised in your own mind that this is where God is to be found, therefore, that God is found in the ordinary and regular things of life. On the other hand, Christians, it seems, have often had trouble keeping that in view. It's common for us to go off to church, to associate meeting God with the liturgy there, in this special place at this special time. And it seems as though we Christians are always struggling to make sure that we realize the liturgy must spill over into life, that it's supposed to have an effect on how family life is lived. So as outsiders, when we look at the Jewish community, it seems like you really have something beautiful to hang on to, something that will attune you to what I think is the truth of the matter, and that is that God is operative always and everywhere, that He's to be found in all of our experience. A phrase I love to use is that all of life is potentially revelatory. Every human thing that happens can speak to us of God. The sunset, the family meal, our own failures and sins, all of that has a potential to reveal the God who is at work in all of history. So if you start out that history is constructed by a dialogue between God and human beings, it's what happens as God interacts with us. And as we expect Him to work these new and wonderful things for us, we are given a lot of our religious zest or flavor. Can I ask you about what you thought about that movie?
What I was going to make reference to is that, Fiddler on the Roof,
Fiddler on the Roof we were talking
his
about,
Tevye's discussions with God seemed almost to be a symbol of of that feeling that Judaism does not have to be practiced in the sanctuary, in the synagogue. It can be practiced in the home. Again, if you look at the history around the time of a Tevye, or the Fiddler on the Roof took place, was in late 19th century Russia. And another reason that Judaism is emphasized at home is one of pure logistics, is that there were many times no synagogues to worship in, and that much of it had to be done in the home. And
that's a good point, yeah, and it also raises that whole idea of persecution again and lack of sensitivity, and the notion of the Jews having difficulty maintaining their legitimate presence on the world scene. I think that's what a lot of Jewish people really want, or the leadership talks about having, is recognition by the other religious traditions of their legitimacy, that it's not, Christians shouldn't be just interested in converting Jews, but should recognize what is good and valuable in the Jewish religion. I was just thinking about the Jewish homeland question and what Israel means to modern-day Jews and what the geography means. Now, that's something, again, that we Christians, I don't think, have much feel for. In the Catholic tradition, we have a big emphasis on Rome as a place, but even there, we keep insisting that we're not tied to Rome and that the Pope could live someplace else, theoretically. We're not just located there, and we are a worldwide church and so on. But it seems as though place, geography, the land of Israel, has an importance for Jewish people that Christians have trouble understanding. Do you have any feel for that at all? Does that raise anything in your own mind about your own outlook on that? Or I know a lot of Jewish people today, a certain number, go from the United States and settle in Israel. That's always a call for that. I remember when Begin was in this country recently, he was, I think, addressed a group of people who were going to go to Israel. And I remember hearing just little bits and pieces of it where he was praising them for making this move and so on.
Yeah, it's really hard to talk about it now because it is such a sensitive issue. It is one of the arguments when when Jews are told that they have no right to that area. They inherited it in the 1940s, and the Arabs, or I don't want to say the Arabs, but
Palestinians.
The Palestinians had been there for a long time before that, and the Jews will counter by saying it was given to us in the time of Moses. That again, it's a very touchy issue. It depends on your understanding of Judaism as a whole.
Could you ever see yourself going to Israel, and would
No.
you have a desire to travel there?
I have a desire to travel there. It's one of the goals I've set for myself. I don't know that I would want to live there. My own, it would be more a matter of politics, though. My political views and the views of the political views of Israel, of the nation of Israel, the laws of Israel. I don't know if I could see myself settling there.
Do you have Jewish friends that talk about that? Is that ever a topic of conversation?
Oh yeah, they some have visited, some are going to school there. They have seen Israel, or they see Israel in something of a different light. They are really they're almost right-wing now, right-wing Israelis. Fight for the sanctity of Israel. Israel must not be taken out of the hands of the Jews. I myself really cannot completely go along with that.
Don't you think that, though, that has religious roots in some
definitely.
ways? I mean, it's back to the question of the promised land again, that story of the Exodus, which is so important to the Jewish community. Is, of course, what happened is that they were able to take over this land and to conquer it and to make it their own, and they saw it as the gift of Yahweh, their God, to them.
Well, that is what how the Jews staked their claim to Israel. I mean, that is what it is based on.
Yes, I remember Begin saying, it's not really up for discussion. It's a biblical matter. It's a biblically based conviction that this is our land, and it's back to that Exodus event again, which again has this air of realism about it. It's that idea we were talking about, that there's a group of people who are enslaved under the Pharaoh in Egypt, and their God brings them out of that and gives them political, economic, and social freedom. Again, religion is so bound up there with the culture, with the times, with all the secular goings and comings. And it's what gives, I think, one of the distinctive flavors to Judaism. So this idea of finding God in their history is not an abstract theory they arrived at, but a conviction that they came to them as a result of their experience as a people.
And when they look forward to see what the future of Israel is, naturally, again, they look back upon that time.
That's right, and they see that as the model for what ought to happen in times ahead. We were talking about this, reading about the Exodus and so on. Did you study that in school, and was that a primary point that came
in public
through?
School,
in Hebrew school, no. When you went to Hebrew school and prepared for your bar mitzvah and so on?
That was the primary point. That much of Judaism and much of Judaism beyond that is the emphasis of Judaism, as most of Christianity is based on the time of Jesus.
Yes.
So much of Judaism is based on this time.
Right, that's an interesting play-off, because Christians often talk about what happened to Jesus as sort of an Exodus experience. That is, his death and rising, and the whole idea of baptism being connected with the passing over the Red Sea and coming into the new promised land as leading the new life of Christ. Much of the imagery connected with Christian understandings is taken from the Exodus as well. You know, I was thinking about it, much of our own country's imagery of who we are as a people is tied up with the Exodus event as well. You know, that our founding fathers tended to interpret our experience in terms of the Jewish Exodus. Thomas Jefferson, in his inaugural address, talked about us as being the new Israel and God forming a covenant with us as he formed a covenant with Israel of old. And when Franklin and Jefferson were asked to suggest seals for the country, official insignias for the new country, they went back to Jewish roots to find it. One was Moses parting the Red Sea, and the other one was God leading the people with the pillar of fire by night. Interesting, isn't it, that it was seen as here was a group of people under the tyrants in Europe. They crossed over a body of water, the ocean, to come to the new promised land, the United States, and in doing so made a covenant with God to develop this land, and they thought of themselves, therefore, as the chosen people. It's a parallel with the Exodus. In fact, what they did was to go back to the Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh, as we call it, trying to avoid the phrase Old Testament. In an ecumenical age, we should speak about the Hebrew Scriptures, I think. But anyway, go back to the Hebrew Scriptures in order to understand our experience in the United States. Oh, wait, was that point ever brought out in your classes?
Oh, yeah. And,
that connection
and
with
to
our
take
American
it a step
experience?
further, when they needed laws to govern themselves, the Founding Fathers came up with the Constitution, and it was widely recognized now, and that when they were laying the groundwork for the Constitution, they went back to the book of Jewish laws, the Torah. When they delivered the Constitution to America, or the Americans were delivered their set of laws, it was a parallel to the Jews being delivered their set of laws.
Isn't that interesting? So those parallels were made. I suppose that had a lot to do with Jews being good members of the society and fitting into the United States. I'm sure that to have things back in our history that reflected Jewish outlooks would be a very helpful thing in terms of the problems of persecution and anti-Semitism that can rear its ugly head now and then, and which must be fought at all costs, and which we Christians must be so careful about. So I would think the Jews would want to make link-ups like that.
Oh, definitely. And later on in my Jewish education, after we really completed our biblical studies, or our very primary biblical studies, and they began to emphasize the Jewish contribution through the ages, up through, with a lot of emphasis on the Jewish contribution in America. The great scientists, the great scholars, the great musicians.
Right. I guess it is always a remarkable point as Christians look at that as the terrific contributions that Jews have made in all areas of culture. And that really needs to be emphasized in a world that is prey to anti-Semitism. So many great people, and that we look up to, and it's probably good to bring that out. And when we're talking about all on this question of the Jewish realism, that's what I think is focusing our whole conversation, that there's a realism, whether it's about the land, about history, about finding God in experience, whether it's Tevye and in Fiddler on the Roof and so on. And I thought of another way in which you get that sense is in the Psalms, the beautiful prayer poems that we find in the Hebrew Scriptures, often attributed to David, and which seem to me to be have such a wonderful sense of the realism of life. We find people there talking to God about all kinds of things, their angers, their frustrations, and so on, and their joys as well, their everyday life. I wondered what sort of influence the Psalms had on you as you were growing up. Did you say them? Did you learn them at home? For your bar mitzvah, did you have to know certain Psalms or repeat them? What role did they play?
Depending on the time of your birth, you are, I don't want to say assigned, but you are, the Torah is read at a certain, each segment of the Torah is read at a certain time of the year. And depending on the time of your birth, when you achieve 13 years, you are assigned, or that is your section, that is your maftir, as we call it.
What was yours?
Mine was in Exodus.
Mm-hmm.
It was Moshe, which is Moses, and it dealt with the Jews as they were preparing to leave Egypt. Mm-hmm. They had just received, each portion is somewhat small, really, compared, to the overall, but it dealt with the Jews as they were preparing their exodus from Egypt.
And this becomes a special text for you,
mm-hmm.
then, and something that's supposed to mean something
it is
special.
read on your bar mitzvah,
uh-huh.
and then each year after that, on what would be close to the anniversary, when that certain section is read in synagogue, usually the person is called up again whereas the cantor would usually chant that portion, the person who was bar mitzvahed, if in attendance, he can go up and
he will recite
that text. He will recite it
then.
himself.
Uh-huh.
And it's something you somehow, even if you just don't really think about it for a long time, it's something that will not leave you.
Yes.
I really have not recited it, or even there are times where I won't even think about it for a long time, and then it'll still all of a sudden it'll dawn on me, and I'll recite it to myself, and every word comes back.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting point about the way religion gets into our bones and blood and makes up our psyche, isn't it? The experiences you have as a youngster, growing up by going to the synagogue as you did, or preparing for bar mitzvah, or having the celebrations in your home, somehow that becomes part of your consciousness, makes up who you are as a person, and that's true for all of us. In a way, we can't get that religion out of our bones and bloods if we want to. I like the way you said it. It will come back to you even if you don't think about it over a period of time. It becomes part of your way of thinking. And I think much more so the symbols that are important in your religion, the imagery you have, the stories you were told, like hearing that story of the Exodus over and over and studying it in school, and hearing about Yahweh, the great God, that is bound to influence the way you look at life. And it makes a difference, doesn't it? I think that there's probably ways in which you look at life different from the way people who grow up in the Christian tradition do. I mean, there's tremendous similarities in commonality and all of that, but I think there probably is a distinctive outlook. And maybe you notice that in dealing with Christian people sometime. But I know you're married to a Christian girl, right? And woman. And it's probably somehow that you need to make an effort to understand one another in terms of religious background. But in this case, I think throughout the whole program, Sheldon, we've been trying to emphasize this realism of finding God in the ordinary things of life. And I would think that would probably stay with you. And it translates into an attitude towards the homeland and Israel today. I think we Christians really have to try to understand better what the land of Israel means to the Jewish people, how important it is and how people are ready to fight for that today. We have to try to understand the militant, rightist political people, I think, as you described them earlier, if I have the right words there. And that may well grow out of a real religious conviction. I think we have to be aware of that. And we Christians who have not quite that same sense of land and geography probably have to sensitize ourselves to that. But what I mostly want to do from you and talk is to learn. I mean, you speak as a layman in your religion, and I want to get out of that the sense of realism of God. Wonderful thing to be able to look at the sunset and say, "Thank you, God," or to talk to God about the angers, even at God. God, I'm angry now. I'm having trouble dealing with this. The psalmist is so good in bringing that home to us. God, I thank you for this day, or I'm struggling with this, or what about my money problems and all of that. So I think that we could learn. And dialogue like we've had, Sheldon, here, not at a theological level, but trying to talk more of what we get out of our religions, how it's in our bones and blood, maybe that's a good thing for us, and we end up learning. It's an important part of the Jewish-Christian dialogue that needs to keep going on.